This show is part of the Darkmoor Podcast Network.
To join our community Discord or see more content from our members, visit darkmoorpodcasts.com.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Dragon Mind, the TTRPG podcast where we discover our best selves through gaming. Today, we're continuing our D&D 2024 Practical Possibilities coverage with the 2024 Ranger. If you want to contact me directly, you can message me in the Darkmoor Podcast community Discord or email me at dragonmindpodcast@gmail.com, all linked in the description below. Last episode, I made the claim that Paladin was perhaps the most nerfed class in the game. To clarify, what I meant is that it has had the greatest power decrease from its 2014 version. But that doesn't mean that the 2024 version is weak by any means. It just used to be a leader in single target damage, but its output has been outpaced by the redesigned Barbarian, Fighter, and Rogue. Still, based on the comments I got on the last episode, and what I've seen from various forums, the consensus seems to be that although many are disappointed by the redesigned Divine Smite, the 2024 Paladin is still healthy overall. Its half-martial, half-casting cousin, the Ranger, is a different story. Since its official release in the new Player's Handbook, the 2024 Ranger has received a lot of criticism. While Divine Smite has been praised as an iconic tool in the Paladin's kit, many in the optimization community have voiced that Hunter's Mark is a deceptively underpowered option. And while many Ranger players see it as a must-have pick, it's actually best to use the breadth of alternative spells the Ranger has on offer. With Paladin, the nerf to Divine Smite now encourages the use of its other spells, leading to a more diverse play experience. The new Ranger does the opposite. Its new base class features double down on Hunter's Mark, offering mediocre benefits at levels gained too late for them to matter. The most damning criticism of the class I've heard is that this makes Ranger boring, as it suggests that Hunter's Mark is the one true option, a reverse from the Paladin redesign. So, for this episode, I have an additional challenge. Rather than just establish whether or not the class is right for you, I've got to answer whether or not the class is worth taking at all. Now, to be upfront, I do think you can build an interesting, distinct character using the Ranger kit. I also think a lot of the criticism is valid, and also, in some cases, oversimplified. A lot of it will boil down to what you as a player expect a Ranger to be, which itself is a hot topic of debate depending on who you talk to. Some envision Rangers as master archers, either as a leader of single target ranged damage, or an archer with trick arrows, like Hawkeye from the Avengers. Some envision it as a master survivalist coming alive in the wilderness. Treant Monk described the 2014 Ranger as a fighter with spells, which was difficult to dispute. From the mechanical side of things, I personally think that this third description ends up being the most accurate. A class that sits somewhere between fighter and druid to have the right tool for when you need it. So, like all of our class reviews, let's start with what's changed between the 2014 and 2024 versions. First, like Paladin, Rangers start out with spellcasting right from level 1. They can prepare more spells and swap out a spell once a day. Also at first level, you get Hunter's Mark automatically prepared with 2 free castings per long rest. To the community's dismay, the spell still requires concentration even though it doesn't cost a spell slot. In the first playtest version of the Expert Classes UA, there was an experimental version where the Ranger got Hunter's Mark for free without concentration, but even then, the designers considered this damage bump too powerful. Having DM'd for players that used this version of Hunter's Mark both during the 1D&D playtest and the Tasha's UA, I never found the lack of concentration to be a problem. On the other hand, Treant Monk did an analysis showing that Ranger has a good number of spells that don't require concentration. So while I agree that I think concentration is an unnecessary limiter, From levels 1 through 4, Hunter's Mark does allow a ranger to compete, perhaps even lead its peers in single target damage. And lastly, at first level, rangers also get 2 weapon masteries. At second level, rangers get Deft Explorer, formerly the canny effect from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. Roving and Tireless, which used to be enhanced effects from Deft Explorer, are now their own separate features gained at 6th and 10th level respectively, but otherwise remain the same as they did in Tasha's. Also, like Paladin, at second level, Druidic Warrior from Tasha's is an option that rangers can take instead of selecting a fighting style, granting them 2 druid cantrips of their choice. What makes this a little less exciting for rangers is that paladins tend to emphasize melee combat, and so for them, getting 2 cleric cantrips gives them something to do at range. Rangers, on the other hand, are already a little more versatile by design, so while it's neat to pick up Thorn Whip or Shillelagh, doing so doesn't increase the ranger's versatility in a meaningful way, in the same way that Blessed Warrior does for Paladin. At third level, Primeval Awareness, which had an alternative of Primal Awareness in Tasha's, has just been removed. While Primeval Awareness was just a dud, I thought the free utility spells from Primal Awareness helped the ranger feel like it was connected to nature in a way that mechanically felt useful. After all, I'm of the belief that if a mechanic is so situational that you never use it, you might as well not have it on your character sheet, because it isn't contributing to the group's shared story. Moving on, new to the Ranger base class are 2 expertises gained at 9th level. To repeat a point from past episodes, skills carry less mechanical weight than they did in 2014. But it's still nice to see that Rangers get more than 1 expertise with some level investments. A funny design note from the reveal article is that Hide in Plain Sight, which was a horrifically situational feature previously gained at 10th, has been removed because expertise in stealth should be enough to cover any situation that it would be used for anyways. 13th level is where we start to see some of the community's complaints, and why the ranger quote-unquote falls off in the higher tiers of play. Relentless Hunter prevents damage from breaking your concentration on Hunter's Mark, which is a limiter on Hunter's Mark a lot of the community thinks is unnecessary to begin with. For comparison, at 13th level, clerics are using Divine Intervention, and bards can learn spells from 4 big spell lists. Hunter's Mark is giving you 1d6 extra force damage on your weapon attacks. Again, in Tier 1, this is fairly competitive, but even if Relentless Hunter removed concentration from Hunter's Mark, it doesn't address the underlying issues that the class is facing at this point. To compare it to other martials in Tier 3, fighters have a 3rd attack, monks have a 5th attack, and paladins have smite options that scale with their level. The extra d6 just isn't cutting it anymore. At 17th, Precise Hunter grants advantage on all attacks against a creature you've Hunter's Marked, and at 20th, the Hunter's Mark damage finally increases from a d6 to a d10. Not only are these bonuses minuscule at this point in the game, other classes have better damage and have additional choices they can make. Fighters can switch up their mastery effects with different loadouts and tactical master. Monks can change any of their unarmed strikes to grappling and shoving, and their damage all becomes force, which is more reliable. And even from level 1, paladins can choose alternatives to Divine Smite, foregoing pure damage for situational effects. If you're building a ranger with Hunter's Mark, you're not getting these alternatives. Instead, you have to use completely different spells, like Spike Growth or Summon Fey, which also require concentration. From the outside, it's understandable why Ranger is getting a lot of flack. In D&D 2024, there seemed to be a design push to make melee a stronger damage option than ranged, which is fair in the sense that ranged characters are risking less by staying far away, so their rewards don't need to be as high. That being said, even if they aren't leading in terms of damage, there doesn't seem to be a lot that Rangers uniquely get that other classes don't, at least when looking at the base class. As a tangent, contrary to some people's belief, I don't dissuade players from picking a class if it's underpowered. There's an argument to be made that the 2024 Rogue is the least powerful class in the game, and yet I find its kit interesting and engaging. Really, I dissuade players from picking classes that are either disengaging to play or that aren't going to fulfill the expectations from the player. For example, if you were a player in my game and came to me and said you wanted to create a Hawkeye-like bowmaster, I'd recommend building a fighter. And if you wanted to create a master survivalist, I'd probably point you toward druid or rogue with expertises in nature and survival. I agree that ranger would be boring to play if all you did was hunter's mark, which the base class seems to encourage you to do. And if I had a player looking at the class as a mechanical package, rather than having a story idea that conflicts with its mechanics, I could see being able to recommend it. So, who is this class for? I think in terms of role, Ranger is going to best serve players that are great at pivoting. They aren't the best damage dealers, nor are they the best healers or controllers. But I think there is value in creating a character that's second best at a few of these things, covering gaps when they show up. Rangers may not lead the martial classes in terms of pure damage output, but they'll contribute. I've personally played in games where a well-timed druid control spell, like Entangle, Silence, or Spike Growth, has turned the tables in combat, and made a potentially deadly encounter much more manageable. While druids are going to cast those spells more readily, they don't have the single target ranged damage potential that a ranger has. And of course, as a second or third string healer, rangers can prepare cure wounds, aid, and lesser restoration for emergencies. Similar to Bard, there are just so many things you could do that even if you're not the best at any one of them, it can be just what the party needs when they need it. Although the Ranger can cover many different roles, I also don't think that it leaves the average complexity range, which is how it's labeled in the PHB. The situations where you'd want to use its spells are fairly obvious, and it doesn't have a secondary budget to track like sorcerers or monks, beyond just spell slots. If you're a player that's familiar with the mechanics and want something that stands out from a standard archery fighter, I think Ranger can offer some alternative tools that can be fun to play with, especially as we get into its subclasses. Even back in 2014, I felt that subclasses is where the Ranger really shined. While other classes' subclasses highlight part of their core gameplay loop, like Barbarian subclasses enhancing Rage or Bard subclasses giving alternative uses for Bardic Inspiration, each of the Ranger subclasses has its own unique gameplay. Like the other classes, I'm still going to order them in terms of complexity. First up, to me, the simplest Ranger subclass is Hunter. In 2014, each of the Hunter's features was a menu of 2 or 3 options, which with other subclasses usually meant it was more complex, like Battlemaster Fighter or Wildheart Barbarian. However, in the 2024 redesign, at most, you're picking between 2 options, and even then, one is a little more obviously useful than the other. For example, Hunter's Prey lets you choose between a damage bump with Colossus Slayer or an additional attack against a second target with Horde Breaker. Now, the second target of Horde Breaker needs to be within 5 feet of the original target, which is much less likely to happen unless your DM is signaling to you that you're about to enter a specific kind of encounter. So, Colossus Slayer is the obvious general option, but also new to 2024, you can switch your Hunter's Prey after a short or long rest, meaning that if the DM is foreshadowing a fight against a horde and gives you the chance to short rest, you can switch to Horde Breaker for use against that situational encounter. Now, also new to 3rd level, Hunters get Hunter's Lore, which lets you know the vulnerabilities, resistances, and immunities of creatures that you've Hunter's marked. At 7th level, Hunters get Defensive Tactics, which give you 2 options, Escape the Horde and Multi-Attack Defense. Again, looking between the two, Multi-Attack Defense is much more generally useful than Escape the Horde, but like Hunter's Prey, you can switch to it after a short or long rest. Even though it appears there are choices to make in the Hunter subclass, I find that picking the preferred route is a little easier, and you're really just focusing on your ability to make attack rolls and survive specific situations. which is why I think Hunter is the simplest subclass. Now, the next two are really similar in terms of complexity, and I can see arguments for why you would pick one as the next simplest instead of the other. But if I had to choose, I think I'd give the simpler slot to Gloomstalker. Whereas Hunter gives you a feature where you have to pick one of two options, Gloomstalker just gives you a lot to remember right at 3rd level. There's a boost to initiative, a speed increase on the first turn of combat, bonus spells, a dark vision boost, and the unique ability to become invisible to creatures that rely on dark vision to see you in darkness. That's a lot by itself, but it also gives a feature that lets you deal 2d6 extra psychic damage on a weapon attack, up to wisdom modifier number of times per long rest. It's a smite style feature with its own resource budget to track. Like Hunter, 7th level gives Gloomstalkers a defensive feature, in this case proficiency in wisdom saves, unless for whatever reason you're already proficient in wisdom saves, in which case you get a proficiency in intelligence or charisma saves. Personally, I think Gloomstalker is more powerful than Hunter, but there's a lot more to learn and use right out of the gate. In addition, once you hit 9th level and get the Fear spell, there's even more versatility you unlock in terms of role. Now, Fey Wanderer doesn't quite get as much as Gloomstalker, and in my opinion, I still think it requires a little bit more mechanical finesse to use to its potential. Like Gloomstalker, you get bonus spells right at 3rd level. While I'm personally not a huge fan of Charm Person, Misty Step, Summon Fey, and Dimension Door are very, very strong options. Dreadful Strikes, which is the 3rd level offensive buff, is also curiously written. It deals 1d4 extra psychic damage on weapon attacks, but it reads a target can only take this extra damage once per turn, meaning if you use extra attack and target a different creature, you can trigger Dreadful Strikes more than once. While Gloomstalker also had other bonuses, like Dark Vision, a bonus to initiative, and a first turn speed boost, Fey Wanderer lets you add your wisdom modifier to charisma checks and grants proficiency in deception, performance, or persuasion. I think in terms of combat, Gloomstalker is going to end up being more powerful, but if you're playing a long form campaign where combat is less frequent, like political intrigue, Fey Wanderer may end up having tools that come up more often. The reason that I think it's more complex is just because it's a little more situational. The defensive level 7 feature, Beguiling Twist, is another good example, whereas Gloomstalker just offers a flat proficiency in a mental save. Beguiling Twist is a conditional reaction that lets you redirect a charm or frighten effect to a different target. It's flavorful, it's fun when you pull it off, and it requires a certain level of attentiveness that's not necessary for hunters or Gloomstalkers. And, maybe predictably, I think the most complex ranger subclass is the Beastmaster, for the same reason that I think Druid is the most complex class in the game: stat block management. Now, whereas Druid asks that a player potentially familiarize themselves with dozens of stat blocks between the player's handbook and the monster manual, Beastmaster Ranger has just 3 to choose from. Added complication comes down to managing a second unit on the board. In my 8 years of playing 5e, nothing has slowed my game down faster than adding units to the board. God help us if one player has 2 or more extra units to manage. There's some fiddliness in how strong the Beast companions are too. Its AC, HP, and attacks are calculated using your wisdom modifier, so there are a lot more calculations to track than most other subclasses. That being said, I think the Beastmaster is a much more usable subclass than its 2014 counterpart. Just know that if you want to pick it, you're going to be responsible for a lot of management to avoid bogging down your group's experience. Lastly in our review, we have the Ranger's multi-classing potential. Given that Rangers are strong in Tier 1, but fall off in Tiers 3 and 4, I think the best multi-class route would be to begin as a Ranger and branch off after level 5 when you get extra attack. 3 levels of Battlemaster Fighter grant extra weapon masteries, action surge, and some interesting maneuver options that a Ranger normally wouldn't have, like trip attack or disarming attack. Taking levels of Rogue would increase a Rogue's damage through sneak attack, versatility with Cunning Strike, or survivability if you go all the way to evasion. Also interestingly, I wouldn't discount a level or two of monk. Now, martial arts conflicts with using a short bow or a long bow, but if you envision your ranger as a two-weapon user, there's some surprising synergy between the two. As long as you prioritize dex and wisdom, as one may do with a Beastmaster ranger, unarmored defense is a surprisingly nice way to forego relying on armor to calculate your character's AC. If you fight at range anyways, martial arts ends up becoming this neat side thing you can do in tavern brawls, rather than a core part of your character's fighting style. While evaluating Paladin, a lot of our attention was on combining it with charisma casting classes to accelerate its spell slot progression, to have more ammo for smite spells. Unfortunately, Ranger has no such equivalent feature, and there are only two wisdom casters in the game, Druid and Cleric. Unfortunately, even though the ability scores and thematics make Druid seem like a natural fit, Ranger already has a lot of the functionality of Druid spells built in. Druid also doesn't improve the Ranger's core playstyle or offer meaningful versatility. Cleric, on the other hand, is a different story. At Cleric 1, Divine Order offers either the Protector or Thaumaturge options, although through the lens of multiclassing Ranger, one choice is much more helpful than the other. Since many Ranger features specifically turn off once your character is wearing heavy armor, Thaumaturge offers a cool bonus, adding your wisdom modifier to Arcana and Religion checks. With a Fey Wanderer that already adds their wisdom to charisma checks, you could potentially have a very interesting jack-of-all-trades character when it comes to skills. Of course, recognizing that skills mean less in 2024 than they did in 2014. Personally, I don't think Channel Divinity is anything to scoff at, and at level 3, Guided Strike and War Priest from War Domain Cleric are excellent direct damage bumps that synergize well with the Ranger's core gameplay style. There may be some flavor differences in a Wilderness class like the Ranger and a Pious class like the Cleric, but I can see an effective three-dimensional character that comes out of the union of these two kits. Now, on the other side, I'm not sure I'd recommend Ranger as a strong dip from another class. The natural fits may be other ranged weapon users, like Fighter or Rogue. The problem is that dipping from Fighter into Ranger means that your Fighter is going to slow their extra attack progression, which is the Fighter's main source of damage. I can see dipping from Rogue to Ranger, but if you start as a Rogue, you'd be delaying the extra attack that you'd get from investing 5 levels of Ranger. I think it'd just make more sense to start as Ranger 5 and then build Rogue the rest of the way. The last possibility could be Monk as the main class. Again, if you envision a 2-weapon wielding character, Monk has some great synergy with 2-weapon fighting as long as you pick up a weapon mastery. At Ranger 1, not only do you get the Nick property, you could also pick up Hunter's Mark and Cure Wounds, just in case of emergencies. Dipping one more level gives you expertise and the 2-weapon fighting style, which may help your damage output even more. The one thing I'd advise is being clear on the scope of your campaign and the possibility to rebuild. This kind of multiclass is fun at very specific level ranges. For example, if you're invited to a one-shot where everyone builds level 4 characters, Monk 2, Ranger 2 could be a lot of fun. If everyone goes to level 5, though, no matter how you split it, having a multi-classed martial character is unlikely to feel as strong as your allies that are single-class martials with extra attack. On the other side, if you have a Monk 5 Ranger 1, it feels a lot better than it did. But again, once you hit level 10, it might have been better to stick with Monk all the way to 10 as well. When contemplating builds and combinations like this, it's not just the synergy that matters. The level that you're playing at and the length of time you're committing to a character matter too. Overall, while I found things I like about the Ranger and could see characters I'd like to play using these rules, I think a lot of the criticism is fair. From Treant Monk's preliminary damage calculations, Ranger struggles to perform in a way that I think a lot of players skimming through the classes would expect. And seeing its relatively limited multiclassing potential makes me dismiss it more than examine it, unlike the Paladin. I'll have to see it in actual play before I can offer suggested fixes, But for now, if you're thinking about playing Ranger, just be wary of how its mechanics relate to the stories that come out of them. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Dragonmind is a proud member of the Darkmoor Podcast Network. To discover more TTRPG content like this, visit darkmoorpodcasts.com. If you had any insights or questions, be sure to email us at dragonmindpodcast@gmail.com or post in our discussion channel in the Darkmoor Podcast community Discord, linked in the description below. Our theme song, J-Pop, is brought to you by Thesleyan Studios. You can check out more of their awesome work at thesleyanstudios.com. Have an awesome day, and remember, your story matters. Bye-bye now.
Well, Grimton, Morlinde and Ulrich are gone. We're in a new, unfamiliar land of Kolgafir. What's our first move?
Polaris, I'm not too certain, but I did hear Fishbelly talking about something.
Oh, yeah. With the Warlord's half-sister in a meeting.
Yeah, that's about the only lead we have so far. We haven't been here long. Might be worth checking out.
Seems like a plan to me.
Join us as our party explores an unforgiving region of the Cusp and allies with new party members in Arc 3 of Advantage, a 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons audio drama focused on storytelling and character development, in the Darkmoor Podcast Network. Find us in your podcast app.